Alright. This is a short story called Blow the Man Down by Christine van Antwerp. Will got up from his hands and knees, stretching as he chucked the holy stone back into the bucket of filthy water. He looked around him grimly. They had been out on the open waters for more than 3 months, and nearly half the crew had either succumbed to scurvy or were well on their way. Was this it for him? Was he the next to die? Unbeknownst to Will, Captain Grayson had been watching him closely that morning back in London as he delivered Mrs. Hudson's groceries. He had helped himself to 2 loaves of bread and 3 biscuits from her shopping parcel, wrapping it in a napkin before stashing it safely underneath the steps of her front porch. After the elderly woman had said goodbye and closed her door, Will kneeled down and retrieved his loot, rather pleased with himself as he hungrily shoved a biscuit into his mouth. Crossing the street, Captain Grayson had closed in on him, grabbing hold of the back of Will's collar before forcing him into an abandoned alleyway. Will was informed that he could either accompany Grayson to the nearest constable, who would have ensured he be hanged for his petty crime, or Will could join the captain's crew of bandits at sea. Will had, regrettably, chosen the latter. At first, he was excited. Going on adventures, wreaking havoc, and searching for long-forgotten treasures seemed to be what he was born for, not the dreary life he had found himself living in a gloomy London where he barely survived on the morsels he could manage to set his hands on. Besides, he had become quite good at nicking things, and Will figured that his talents were the main reason that Captain Grayson had recruited him in the first place. The real life of a pirate, however, proved to be much darker than the light-hearted fables that they were told as children. These were vile, malnourished, and violent men, having no respect for anything or anyone except their captain. Will was bullied, spat on, and ridiculed on a daily basis, being nothing more than the ship's scrubber and so-called scallywag. In the entire time that he'd been at sea, they had not encountered a single ship, and the chance of their survival grew slimmer with each passing day as their food supply became critically low. Life at sea had proven to be treacherous and their demise imminent. Had he known that a while back, he would have gladly chosen a quick death at the gallows. Will sighed deeply as he looked up at the sky. The night was bleaker than most, almost foreboding as the air seemingly grew more thick and somber by the second. He grabbed his bucket off the deck and emptied its contents into the ocean, wiping the sweat from his brow as he listened to the black waters breaking against the ship. "Scrubbed the whole deck, have ye?" Captain Grayson's rough voice asked from behind him. Will swung around, coming face to face with a large, beefy man. "Yes, Captain," Will answered. "What's this, then?" Captain Grayson... Oh, man, that voice is not consistent. Okay, I think I'm just gonna try to keep it more vanilla. "What's this, then?" Captain Grayson asked, lightly grabbing hold of Will's jaw, turning the boy's face sideways as he inspected his bulging, bruised eye. "And whose handiwork be it?" God, that accent. Okay. The captain asked, dropping his hand from Will's face. "Becker, Captain," Will answered, looking down at his feet as his cheeks flushed red. "Ah," Captain Grayson answered. "No matter then. You'll be dead in a week or 2 anyway, with the whole lot of us following if we don't find food soon. I guess everybody's Scottish or something, or like maybe Irish. I can't tell what I'm doing." "Yes, Captain," Will answered dully. "Well, go on then," the captain said. "You done your job for today. Off to bed or whatever you do when you ain't mopping the vomit off my deck." "The skies look dark, Captain," Will said, ignoring the captain's orders. "Aye," Grayson agreed firmly. Grayson agreed grimly, turning his head up to the skyline. He turned his back to Will, nodded his head, and walked off to his cabin. Will laid on his back in the cabin he shared with 3 other crewmates, listening to the creaking of the wood against the current as the water rocked the ship. He had never before felt so completely abandoned. Being born into an orphanage, he was used to loneliness had grown accustomed to it, but it was nothing compared to the dread that had been accompanying him the last few months. This was different. This was complete desertion. Land ho! Will sat up in his bed, wondering if his mind was playing tricks on him. Land ho! The faint voice called again. Did you hear that? Nelson's voice asked within the darkened cabin. Land ho! It be only Rogers, drunk off his arse. Tully answered, agitation clear in his voice. Be quiet. Trying to sleep. Land ho! Rogers called again. What if Rogers wasn't merely drunk? What if they had indeed neared land? Will got out of bed, rushing out of the cabin as he made his way to the upper deck. All crew on deck, Captain Grayson ordered as a few dozen men rushed to their posts. It was true, they were heading for land. Grayson rushed towards them, grabbing Will by his shoulders. Where be the rest of ye cabin? Get him now! By morning, the ship had docked on the small island. The crew were celebrating, drinking and digging their fingers into the sand, grateful to at least be able to walk on solid earth. Will, on the other hand, had no idea why the men were as ecstatic as they were. Why the men were as ecstatic as they were. It was an island in the middle of nowhere. They still weren't in civilization. There were no other people around. There were no shops they could visit or brothels they could frequent, the latter being something that Will, an inexperienced 18-year-old, had been very much looking forward to. Yikes. Gather round, Grayson commanded and the men lined up in front of him. Now, listen up. No man goes off on his own. Rogers and Will, the two of ye are coming with me to search for food and fresh water. The rest of ye stand and guard the ship. We set sail in 3 days. Why doth the baby do all the exploring, Captain? Becker, a short bony man with sagging skin and thinning hair, protested. By his slurred words, Will reckoned that he had either lost more teeth since he had last seen him, or he was drunk again. This being Becker, it was probably both. So the likes of ye can't go knocking the boy down again, the captain answered, and the crew laughed, Becker soon joining him. Quiet! Grayson shouted, and a deathly silence befell the group. The captain stared at Becker for a few seconds, then hovered over him. You think it be funny, do ya? Grayson asked. Hurting what little remains of your crew. He pointed to Will. You think for one moment that that boy couldn't beat your ass to a pulp? 'Cause he can, but unlike ye, the boy has sense. He flicked Becker's forehead with his finger. Who do you think's gone man the ship if we carry on turning on each other? You gone man her on your own, Becker, are ye? Becker remained silent, gulping audibly as his face flushed of color. Answer me, Grayson yelled, and little droplets of spit hit Becker's face. No, Captain, he stuttered. We can't afford losing a single man. Grayson screamed into Becker's face once again, lowering his voice when he continued. I'll tell you one thing, though. I can afford to lose a dead man walking such as yourself. Scurvy's already had most of you. What's remaining ain't that much to work with. I'm only wasting food on you. Be best that you remember it. The captain turned around, flinging 3 large sacks of cloth at Will. For the supplies. I guess they're Scottish or something. For the supplies, Grayson explained as he made his way towards the trees. Come on then, you two. Rogers looked at Will before following their captain into unfamiliar territory. The island consisted of thick, nearly impenetrable jungle, with thousands of insects that zoomed around their heads endlessly. The 2 older men took the lead, cutting a path through the shrubs and leaves as Will followed with their bags of fruit and berries, occasionally having to climb up a tree to retrieve it. By nightfall, a burning sensation... where was I? Okay, a burning sensation, courtesy of the heavy sacks that he was balancing, had started up between Will's shoulder blades. As they neared a small clearing, he was grateful when Grayson said that they were going to be setting up camp. After making a fire, the three men went in search of leaves and twigs to make themselves a bed for the night. They all shared a pineapple for dinner and headed off to bed. Despite the fact that he was utterly exhausted, Will could not drift off to sleep. His body was bruised and sore, his skin itchy from the dozens of insect bites on his arms, legs, and neck. If only he could get back to London. If only he had not taken the loaves of bread. If he could only go back, he would stop stealing, he would clean up his act, he would make something of himself the honest way. Will sighed in frustration, rolling onto his back as he watched the twinkling stars in the dark sky. He thought back to Mrs. Stewart, the frail old woman at the head of the orphanage. She used to tell them stories of the world, about how nothing was impossible, and that, if they ever felt hopeless, all they had to do was wish upon a star and all their dreams would come true. He used to believe that. He used to search the skies each night before falling asleep. But as the air grew colder and the leaves dampened his clothes beneath him, Will was afraid that there would never fall a single star ever again, at least, not in his lifetime. The next day, the men packed up what little they had brought with them and made their way further into the jungle, occasionally stopping to gather more fruit. Will knew that they needed it, but he wondered how much more of it he would be able to carry before his body split in half. "Shh," Grayson said, stopping in his tracks. The men looked at him in confusion. "Do you hear that?" Will remained silent, listening for whatever sound he was supposed to be hearing. "Water!" Rogers called out, his eyes widening. "It's water!" Will was just about to say that he wasn't hearing anything except for the chirping of birds and the zooming of insects when the men took off running. "Wait!" he called out, following their lead, struggling to keep up with the weight of heavy bags at his sides. "Wait for me!" Rushing forward, Will looked away for a split second and the men were gone. He stopped in his tracks, breathing heavily as his heart pounded against his ribcage. Panic-stricken, he looked around for a trace of his comrades, but found none. Dropping the bags on the ground, Will set off running, now nearly hysterical as he blindly made his way deeper into the unknown. The further he ran, the more afraid he became. What if they left him there? He ran and ran for what felt like an eternity, calling out to the men, stopping to listen for any sign of human life, but found none. He was just about to abandon all hope when, suddenly, Will spotted what seemed to be a house in the distance. That was impossible. Who would build a house in the middle of nowhere? Will's fear was soon replaced by curiosity as he ran towards the small structure, half expecting it to disappear in front of his eyes as mysteriously as it had appeared. When he found himself in front of it, Will cautiously reached his hand out to the wooden door, chipping off a piece of white paint before inspecting it with his fingers. The house wasn't real. The house was real. It wasn't a trick his exhausted mind was playing on him. Will was actually standing in front of an abandoned house on a seemingly deserted island. He tried turning the doorknob, but the door refused to open. Something was jamming it from the inside. Pressing his hands upon a small dirty window, Will peered inside. The house seemed to consist of a singular room. The roof had caved in, blocking the door and destroying whatever was left of its interior. Will could see something shining through the window at the back of the house, and his heart started beating with excitement. He scurried around the brick house, nearly tripping over the rubble as he made his way to the back. Turning the corner, he was stunned to find that the shiny object was a necklace, hanging around a cross made out of sticks and placed in the ground. Fascinated, Will got down on his knees to inspect the piece of jewelry more closely. It was gold, with a big, heart-shaped ruby set in the middle. He was no goldsmith, but he would bet his life that the necklace was valuable. Whoever lived in the house must have died and buried it right there, beneath his feet. Their most prized possession marking their final resting place. Reaching out, he brushed his fingers against the red stone. "Will?" Grayson's voice bellowed from the distance. "Will! Over here!" Will called out excitedly, making his way back to the front of the house. "I'm here." If the captain saw that he had found treasure, he would surely be promoted to a higher rank than just the deck scrubber. "Captain, I found something. There's a house." As Will neared the front of the house, Grayson came into view. The captain frowned at him. "Where are the socks of supplies?" "I dropped them when I lost you," Will answered, trying to catch his breath as he pointed back to the house. "Captain, it's a house. You should see what You dropped them?" Grayson asked angrily. "Captain, the house." Will tried to explain. "There's something at the back. I think it's a grave. There's this necklace and—" "Well, you better find those socks soon," Grayson warned as he turned around and headed back the way he came. "And keep up. I ain't gonna come looking for you again, boy." "Captain, there's a necklace, a treasure," Will called out in confusion. "That be dead man's property," the captain called out somberly from over his shoulder. "That necklace be many things, but treasure ain't one of them. I don't want to hear another word about it. Now hurry up and get those sacks. Rogers and me have found water." That night, the three men sat by the fire, listening to its crackling as Rogers sang a song about some sort of folk tale. "Ye'd be very quiet," Grayson noted as Will watched the flames licking the air. "Ye mad, boy?" Oh, wait, hold on, okay. "Ye be very quiet," Grayson noted as Will watched the flames licking the air. "Ye mad, boy?" "You didn't even come and look," Will answered morbidly. "Look at what?" Grayson asked. "The necklace!" Will nearly shouted in frustration. "I found something valuable and you completely ignored me." "Okay, Will. You can get off your high horse." Grayson shot him a look of warning, and Will softly added the word "sir" to his sentence. The captain stared at the fire. "I know all about your so-called treasure." "What do you mean, Captain?" Will asked. Grayson looked up at him as Will tried to study his face. "These men be my responsibility. I've been at sea for longer than you be alive, boy. I'm captain of that vessel. You think I don't know where I've been steering her?" Will remained silent, not understanding what the captain was trying to say. "We on be Gillette's Island," Grayson continued. "That be his house you found. That be his wife's grave. That be his wife's necklace around that cross. There be a reason no man have ever been foolish enough to take it." "Who was Gillette?" You know what? Okay, I think Grayson's gonna be Scottish, and Will be British, because he's from London. Okay. "Who was Gillette?" Will asked, and Roger stopped singing, now listening in on their conversation. "Why would he build a house in the middle of nowhere?" "I hear he was a good man," the captain answered, turning his attention back towards the fire as its shadows danced around against his facial features. "A naval man. That wife of his was the love of his life. He was lucky enough to have found something like that. I can't say the same, so I don't understand why he did what he did, but the wife got sick, real sick, and people don't like that kind of sickness around him, so, refusing his wife's exile, Gillette set sail and built the two of them a new home on this very island. But matters back home called for his attention, and soon Gillette had to rush back. He promised the wife that he would return in a few days. He even went to a goldsmith, made her that necklace you'd be so fond of. But when Gillette but when Gillette got back here, the sickness had taken his wife. She died, thinking he had abandoned her. So he buried her right here, with the gift that she never got. People say his liver was no good, that's why he died. Me, I reckon it's his heart that killed him. Man mourned himself to death. It was the guilt that took him. Where did you hear that story, Captain? Will asked bleakly. The sea. She has her tales and ways of telling 'em. He got up and stretched his long body. Well, lads, best get to bed. Big day ahead of us tomorrow. Rogers put out the fire, and Will made his way over to his bed, tossing and turning something fierce. The necklace he had stashed beneath him seemed to burn a hole through the leaves. Uh-oh. Grayson shook Will awake. What did you do? He whispered urgently into the darkness, the moonlight barely illuminating his features. Where did you put it? She got Rogers. What? Will asked, starting to panic as he noted something in the captain's voice that he had never heard before. Fear. Where's Rogers? You took it, didn't you? You took it from the dead. Grayson screamed before slapping Will across the face. You've done it. You've doomed us all. Will jumped to his feet as the captain grabbed him by the shoulders. The man was going to kill him. Captain, The blood-curdling, shrill scream of a woman interrupted Will's sentence, echoing through the air as it seemingly came from every direction around them. Grayson slowly let his arms fall to his sides as he backed away from the boy. Will was unsure if his heart was still beating. What was that? Where's Rogers? The captain wasn't listening to him anymore. Even in the dim moonlight, it was clear that all the blood had drained from his face. His eyes, as big as saucers, were staring at something else, something behind Will. Scared out of his mind, the boy swung around, horrified as he looked up at the face of what used to be a woman. Her unblinking eyes were partially eaten away by whatever affliction she had been struck with. Large, swollen boils covered almost every inch of her scaled skin. Her black hair was clotted and dirty, sticking against her head in disgusting, oily strands. The white dress she was wearing was covered in yellow stains of pus. The smell of death and decay polluted the air with invisible, thick clouds. Stumbling backwards, Will fell down as he scurried on his hands toward Grayson, who remained where he was as if planted. The woman's legs were missing as she passed Will, making her way towards Grayson. Causing him to back away until he was pinned against the trunk of a tree. She pressed her body up against the captain, who could do nothing more but shut his eyes. A hand with 3 stumpy fingers began caressing his cheek as the woman inspected his face. She slowly pressed her lips against Grayson's, kissing him passionately as the captain's eyes shot open in horror. Will wanted to help him. He wanted to do something, anything, but the fear had rendered him paralyzed. Eyes still open, Grayson's body slumped to the ground with a sickening thud. The woman backed away from him and floated down towards Will, who could do nothing but watch helplessly as she slowly neared him. This was it. This was his end. The woman studied him, her face nearly pressed against his before contorting in pain as she opened her mouth in a silent scream. Will braced himself, shutting his eyes as he waited for her cold or rotten lips to kiss his. They never did, and, as he slowly opened his eyes, she was gone. Will gathered himself, breathing heavily as he hurried over to Grayson, who was now deathly white and cold to the touch, his face covered in hundreds of blue, swollen veins. Their captain was dead. Mad with fear, Will ran into the jungle, tripping over the lifeless body of Rogers. He made his way back to the ship, soon discovering that every single member of the ship had died that night, each face covered in swollen veins, all eyes frozen open, taken by the woman's kiss. Will went back to the grave the following morning and placed the necklace back around the cross, but he soon found it back in his pocket. He tried burning it, throwing it into the ocean, burying it in sand, but nothing he did could rid him of the cursed object. "Did he die on that island, Grandpa?" my grandson asked curiously as I tucked the blanket tighter around his small body. "No, he survived," I answered, rubbing my temples as I wondered how many stories it would take to make the 8-year-old fall asleep. A passing ship found him a few weeks later. "How did he explain all of the dead men?" He didn't have to, Jacob," I answered. "No one sheds tears for a dead pirate." But he was a pirate as well," the boy said with a frown. "They didn't know that. He told them that he'd been kidnapped by them." "So he lied." I chuckled at the boy's outrage. "Pirates lie." What happened to the necklace? What happened to the necklace?" "It went with him wherever he went. No matter what he did, he was never able to rid himself of it for more than a few hours at a time." "Did he ever try giving it to someone else?" "I don't know, Jacob." I answered, wanting nothing more than to blow out his candle and make my way back to the warmth of my bed. "How can you not know?" the 8-year-old asked impatiently and I chuckled. "I guess I haven't thought the story through then, now have I?" I answered. "You wanted a story, I gave you one. You need to go to sleep now, or your parents are going to be very cross with me tomorrow morning." "So it's not true, then?" Jacob asked, seemingly disappointed. "Of course it's not true," I smirked. "Ghosts don't exist, now do they?" "But how did the necklace keep coming back?" "It was cursed," I answered as I yawned. "What happened to the woman?" "She stayed close to him until the day that he died." "Why didn't she just kill him?" "Because that would have been too simple," I answered. "Haunting him was a punishment worse than death." "But if not another peep," I interrupted. "It's past your bedtime and, more importantly, mine. Now, you don't breathe a word of this to your mother, you hear? If she catches me telling you one more ghost story, she'll have me walk the plank, promise?" Jacob's rosy lips curled into a smile. "Promise, Grandpa." I ruffled the little boy's hair. "Good night." Sighing, I shut the door behind me. The moonlight shone into my otherwise darkened bedroom, the light illuminating the red stone that once again found its way to my bed like it had for the past 57 years. I didn't have to turn around to know that she was behind me. I didn't have to look to know that she was there. I shut my eyes as I whispered to myself the same words that I had whispered for longer than I cared to remember. Don't look," I said into the darkened bedroom. "You don't have to look." But each night, I disregarded my own warning, looking over my shoulder at the contorted face as I wished over and over again that I had never taken that loaf of bread. If only I had never taken that loaf of bread.